Okay, welcome to this brief discussion about ethology. So this forms part of our last discussion in the ESB 412, that is conservation and management of natural resources. So most of the resources that you are charged with the interest of knowing how to manage and conserve, in terms of natural resource, there will be both animals and plants. So there is need for you to understand how these animals behave, especially when they are in their natural habitats. So with ethology, you are trying to establish scientifically how these animals behave. You are looking at how the animals interact with each other, their surroundings, and how these behaviors develop. Okay, so how the behavior changes, either through evolution, through genetics, or even in learning. So with ethology, we examine how the animals communicate, how the animals obtain food, how they avoid predators, and also how they end up reproducing. So key people who played a significant role in establishing ethology, here I listed three. So there is one who studied imprinting in birds. Okay, we'll see what imprinting means. Okay, but it's fixing, it just refers to fixing a particular behavior in an organism at a certain time so that that behavior is there forever. It cannot change. So that was done by Conrad Lorenz. He lived between 1903 to 1989. Then Nicholas Tinbergen, who lived between 1907 and 1988, his major contribution was the development of the 4 questions of behavior. And he studied quite a lot of instinctive behaviors within animals. Then Carl von Frisch, who lived between 1886 and 1982. He is mentioned to be the father of the waggle dams. Okay, so the discovery of these waggle dams, especially in honeybees, which is a mode of communication, is associated with Carl von Frisch. So we've seen ethology, but let's now see why is it important to study ethology. Okay, why is it important to study ethology? Why is it that we now have to be concerned about how animals behave, about how animals interact with each other? So the first point is when through studying ethology, we end up to understand how animals are adapted. Okay, so it helps us to understand animal adaptations. So ethology will help to explain how animals adopt their behavior to survive in different environments. So how they adapt that behavior so that that behavior can enable them to survive in that particular environment. And if they change to another environment, does that behavior change? Because if the behavior does not change, then it might not be able for the animal to survive in the new environment, especially if the behavior was giving this animal benefit in the previous environment. So when you study, for example, the migration patterns in birds, it can help us to understand the seasonal adaptations. So when the particular season has changed, what happens to the birds? Do they migrate to a different place that has a different environmental the environment is different from the initial place they were at. Okay? So through that, then we are able to understand the adaptation of the birds to that particular environment that they are in. The second reason why ethology is important is in wildlife conservation. Studying behavior of animals is crucial in designing effective conservation strategies. Okay, so when you are designing a conservation strategy so that you protect some species which is likely endangered, it is important that you understand the behavior of that particular species that you want to conserve, that you want to protect. So for example, if you learn more about the breeding habits of these sea turtles, that will enable the development of conservation efforts, especially things like now protected nesting sites. Because by studying them, by understanding how they behave, then you can come up with nesting sites that will help to protect them from being endangered. Another bit is ethology helps in the improvement of the welfare of animals. So when you know how animals behave, when you have enough knowledge about how animals behave, then it is possible that we can now improve the living conditions of these animals, be they in zoos, in animals, in farms, or even in domestic settings. Because when you know that the way this animal is behaving shows that this animal is not comfortable, then you are in a position now to go ahead and improve the living condition of that particular animal. Okay? So the example we give is when you understand the stress behavior in farm animals, then you are in a better position to improve the management practices of that particular breed of livestock. Another thing is through ethology, we can enhance human-animal relationships. There are animals which have been domesticated. So we talk of things like dogs, things like cattle, cats, and many others, chicken. Okay? So through ethology, we can now come up, ethology can help us to come up with ways in which we can train some of these animals that have been domesticated, okay, so that they can offer service as humans who are domesticating them will desire. So if you understand, for example, how dogs respond to certain commands, then you end up having dogs with improved obedience. There are some dogs which are supposed to lead people to for example, to lead blind people on the streets. I've seen that in the UK. So for those dogs to have that ability to take you to the supermarket, it means they've been trained. And now you've ended up with that relationship between someone and this particular dog, and the human being in this case is now relying on this animal. I've seen in the UK as well dogs which can just be sent. Okay, so the dog knows where it's going and it knows how to get back home. So they give it something, it goes to a shop, then they take whatever has been written there, put it in the basket or whatever it is, then the dog goes back home. That involves a lot of training, and how the various aspects of training techniques came up, it was as a result of understanding how that animal behaves. So that now when you modify certain behaviors of the animal, then it will respond in this particular way. Another importance is ethology helps us to get insights into evolutionary biology. So when you understand the behavior of animals, it helps scientists to appreciate how species have been evolving over time. For example, when you compare the primate social structures it gives us a clue about how humans have evolved in terms of behavior. Because if you compared, for example, how the chimpanzees behave, the thing is, as humans, we've evolved to be who we are. So it's most likely the way the chimpanzees and the monkeys behave is how we behaved many years back. So when we study the behavior of these primates who are closer relatives to us, then we are in a position to understand what it took for us to evolve in terms of behavior to get to how we behave today. Certain organisms, like insects, through understanding how they behave, then methods to control the existence of these insects can be developed. So in the event that such insects can be pests, then controlling them will have an impact on agriculture. So for example, understanding how pheromones attract insects can lead to eco-friendly techniques to manage pests. So if you know that a particular pheromone will attract a certain group of insects, and these insects are pests, then when you ensure that that pheromone is not present on a farm, then those pests will not come. So how will you have helped to enhance agriculture through pest control? Just by understanding that this group of insects is attracted to this particular chemical or this particular pheromone. So if I remove this pheromone, then these insects will not come. Okay? Then the medical and psychological research. So there are some animal behaviors which will provide models which can help in understanding human psychology. And by understanding human psychology, it eventually impacts on medicine at large. So through the study of anxiety responses in rats as model organisms, so the rats are the model organisms here. By studying how these rats responded to anxiety, those studies were able to contribute to the development of how some human anxiety disorders can be treated. So how did we manage to understand how to treat these anxiety disorders? By studying how rats respond to anxiety. So you study animals, but you end up finding a solution to a human problem. The other bit is environmental impact assessment. So this helps, ethology in this case will help assess how human activities are affecting wildlife and ecosystem. So for example, through climate change, which is largely a result of human activity, tracking how animals are migrating in response to climate change will give an insight to how the environmental shifts are happening. Okay, so if you know that animals are migrating, animals that used to have their migration in the east are no longer coming because of climate change, then that will give you an insight, that will give you an understanding on how the shift in the environment has happened. Okay. So you observe how the animal is behaving, then you are likely to determine what is making that animal to behave that way. Okay. So once you infer why the animal is behaving this way, then you will have answered, you will have gotten an insight into how the environment has been shifting or has shifted. When I talked about the three people who made immense contributions to ethology, I mentioned Tinbergen. He came up with what we call the 4 questions of ethology. And what these questions help is they enable scientists to analyze behavior of animals from different perspectives. So the 4 questions involve, one is about causation. What is the mechanism? Okay, what is causing that animal to behave that way? The second question is about development. So how does that behavior develop over the lifetime of that particular animal? Then the third question is about function. What is the survival value of that behavior? How does the behavior, that particular behavior that you are studying, how does it help the animal to survive and reproduce? Okay. Then the last is evolution or phylogeny. So how does that behavior evolve in species over generations? If the behavior began when the animal was young, how does that behavior change? And how does it change from one generation of the same species to the next generation? So those are the 4 questions that Tinbergen came up with, the 4 questions of ethology. So the first question is about causation or mechanism, which is explained by what causes that behavior. Is it a hormone? Is it a neuron? Is it a stimuli? Okay. An example is, for example, you find a bird which is singing. What is making that bird to sing? What is the cause? So the bird is singing because of hormonal changes in the breeding season. So what is the causation? Hormonal changes. Development or ontogeny. How does the behavior, that particular behavior, develop over an animal's lifetime? Okay. How does it develop over the lifetime of an animal? The example we give here is, when you look at a lion cub, it learns how to hunt by watching and practicing with adults. So the expectation then is the ability of a lion to hunt needs to develop over the lifetime. So as it keeps practicing with adults, that the ability to hunt needs to be perfected with time. So it's a behavior that is changing, that is developing with more watching and with more practice. The third question we mentioned was function, or of what value is that behavior to the survival and reproduction of an animal. The example we give is the ability of a gazelle to run fast will enable that gazelle to escape from predators. So the behavior of the gazelle in this case is running fast. What is the function? What is the survival value? Escaping from predators. Then evolution. How does that behavior evolve in the species over generation? Okay. So the example here is the dance, the waggle dance in bees. How the bees shake their tails. It has evolved to improve food location efficiency. Okay. So it gets better so that the ability of these bees to efficiently locate food is improved. Okay. So let's elaborate a bit further now on those 4 questions. So these 4 questions, they will address different levels of explanation. Okay, they will address the different levels of explanation. So with the causation of the mechanism, it focuses on the immediate, either physiological, genetic, or environmental factors that are triggering a particular behavior. What is causing that behavior? Is it anything in the physiology? Is it anything in the genetics, or is it something in the environment? Okay. Okay? If it's something in the environment, what is it that is causing? Okay, so that question investigates which mechanism drive a particular behavior in response to a stimuli. So for example, a bird sings because of increased testosterone levels during the breeding season. The increased testosterone levels will influence brain activity and vocalization muscles. So because the brain activity has been influenced, the vocalization muscles have been affected, all as a result of the increased testosterone levels, then the bird will sing. The mechanism that leads to singing is the increased testosterone levels. How the increase in testosterone levels makes the bird to sing is by influencing brain activity and influencing the vocalization of muscles. Okay? So as a result of those two, increased brain activity and vocalization of muscles, then the bird can sing. What makes the brain activity to be increased and the vocalization of muscles is the increase in testosterone. So that is the causation, that is the mechanism. Development, this examines how behavior changes and develops over an individual's lifetime. So how the behavior changes, how the behavior develops over an individual's lifetime is influenced by the genetics and the learning. Okay? So development considers how experience, environment, and maturation shape behavior, all the way from infancy to adulthood. As the animal continues to learn, it becomes more experienced. Okay? Then, if the environment does not change, then we don't expect the behavior to do what? To change. But if the environment changes, that will influence the behavior. Then as the animal matures, does it in any way shape the behavior? Does it in any way influence how that animal behaves? So if you compared the behavior of an infant to the behavior of an adult, are you seeing the same behavior or are you seeing differences in the behavior? You might have heard mtu anakuambia wacha kufanya vitu ya kitoto. Development. Because the expectation is as you grow up, kuna vitu zenye hutakikani kufanya namna gani kufanya. Just because maturation is supposed to have shaped you. Experience is supposed to have improved the way you behave. The example we give is how a lion cub learns to hunt through observation and practicing with adult lions. So now it is observing and practicing. So the more it observes, the more it practices, we expect that it will refine its skills as it matures. If you are told to, for example, prepare a certain meal at your age, someone will expect because you are this mature, you know. But if they told your younger sister, who maybe is 2 or 3 years, that person has not learned, is not experienced. So the result that you deliver is just as a consequence of how you've refined that skill with time. The third question, which looked about function, is what is the adaptive value? What is the survival benefit that a particular behavior is granting to an organism? So this question of function explores how a behavior is contributing to an animal's survival and reproductive success. The way an animal behaves inaisaidia namna gani kuishi, inaisaidia namna gani kuweza kuacha watoto wengi. Okay? So this function question seeks to understand the advantages a behavior provides in a specific environment. The behavior fish will have in an aquatic environment will be different. The behavior in a totally varied environment. Okay, so the behavior that a particular animal is, the function question seeks to understand how that behavior is of any survival advantage to that in that environment for that particular animal practicing that behavior. The ability, for example, of a gazelle to run quickly will help it to evade from predators. Once it has evaded from predators, it will be in a position to increase its chances of survival and reproduction. So that answers the function component of that behavior, that ability to run quickly for the gazelles. The fourth question, which is evolution of phylogeny, it investigates the evolutionary history of a behavior and how it has changed across generations. So has that behavior been the same, or that behavior has been changing with time? Okay. So it looks at how behaviors have evolved, either because of natural selection and how they are inherited from their ancestral species. So you'll be through now the evolution question, you want to understand, has this behavior been changing, or the behavior has been the same? Okay. So you realize that a behavior which remains the same, it means it's a very important behavior. That if the animals change, if the animals that is portraying that behavior changes the behavior, then the importance of that behavior on their survival and reproduction will lead to a reduction in their fitness. So then it means that behavior has to remain within the population just the way it is. There should be no evolution through whichever mechanism. So because of natural selection, then only the best behavior will remain within a particular population. So the importance of these four questions that Tinbergen came about with is they help to understand an organism better in aspects of one, conservation biology. So when you're identifying behavior, then it's essential that the behavior will be impacting the survival of that particular animal. So once you know how that animal behaves, then you can come up with proper conservation programs, and for you to know whether the animal is comfortable or not, then you keep just looking at its behavior, because you are able to know how if the animal behaves when it's comfortable and when it is not comfortable. Animal welfare, still related to conservation. You want to keep animals, you want to domesticate animals. So for you to know whether these animals are living in conditions that are comfortable or not, all you do is you look at their behavior. Okay? Neuroscience and psychology. We gave an example of studying the anxiety in rats and coming up with a way to treat anxiety disorders in humans. So you can study that. For neuroscience and psychology, you can use animal models. Then, because of ethical considerations, you cannot use humans directly. You can use animal models, see how their behavior changes. Then that signals likely how the behavior of humans might also change as a result. So in ethology, there are various types of animal behavior. And this behavior can be categorized into different types on the basis of how the behavior is acquired, how the behavior functions, and how the behavior impacts the survival and reproduction of that particular animal. Okay. So the first type we look at is innate behavior, or the instinctive behavior. So innate or instinctive behavior, this is the inborn, the automatic behavior that don't require learning or practice. These are behaviors that are genetically programmed and they are performed correctly for the first time an organism is exposed to the stimulus. So hii ni tabia yenye mnyama anazaliwa nayo, is given to the animal by nature. The animal won't learn this behavior from any other place. But once the organism is exposed to a particular stimulus, then the organism will automatically behave in a particular way. Okay, so that is innate behavior. The animal is behaving not in a way that it has seen before. It has not learned from any other place. But this is an inborn behavior. This is an automatic behavior, okay, which was genetically programmed inside that particular animal. You've seen when sea turtles are born, they instinctively will move towards the ocean just after hatching. So once the sea turtle hatches, the newborns will move instinctively towards the ocean. They've never seen any other sea turtle moving towards the ocean. Okay. But it's a natural behavior. It's something that is within them. It's programmed within them that when they see where the ocean is, that's the stimulus, they behave in a certain correct way. Okay. Birds will perform some courtship dances without ever being taught by any other bird. Those are instinctive, innate behaviors. The second type is the learned behavior. This is acquired either through experience, observation, and interaction with the environment. So because this behavior is acquired, it will allow the animal to adapt to changing conditions. Okay. So learned behavior is what you acquire. You can acquire it either by going through something that is experience, by observing, by watching someone else go through, do something, observation, or by just interacting with the environment. Okay. So the types of learned behavior, they come in several ways. One is habituation. They'll be explained more ahead. So I'll just read through this, then I'll explain them more. So there is the habituation, the classical conditioning, the operant conditioning, observational learning, and finally, the imprinting. The third type of behavior in animals is the social behavior. Social behavior comes as an interaction between individuals of the same species. Okay? So this interaction, as the individuals of the same species are interacting, then that will have an influence on their survival and reproduction. So social behavior is about animals that are in a group, individuals of the same species in a group. As they interact with each other, that interaction, that is the social behavior. And it will end up influencing their survival and their reproduction. So the examples here are elephants, for example, living in herds, living in groups, and they will be cooperating in those groups to care for their young ones. So they are living in groups where they interact with each other in that particular group. How do they influence their survival and reproduction? They care for the young ones. So the elephant doesn't just care for its own young ones, but they care for the young ones cooperatively, as a group, as a herd. Okay? You see wolves, when they are hunting in groups, in packs, they are able to capture large prey efficiently. It's a behavior they've developed because of interacting as individuals belonging to the same species. That's why we are calling them wolves, because all of them belong to the same species. So they interact with each other, social behavior. How is that influencing their survival? It's enabling them to catch prey that is bigger efficiently. So zikiwa mingi pamoja inaweza shika kubwa. Social behavior. Interaction between individuals of the same species, and that will influence survival and reproduction of those individuals. Then there is the communication behavior. So with the communication is about the use of signals to convey information. So the forms of this communication behavior might be, for example, the visual signals, where you have animals like peacocks, the birds, displaying their feathers so that they can attract mates. The auditory signals in whales, where now the whales are using songs to communicate over long distances. The chemical signals, or the pheromones. Ants, when they are trailing food, they will leave scent, zitawacha harufu fulani, so that they can move to where the food is coming from. So they are using the chemicals to communicate to others. Kwamba when you see these chemicals, they are leading you to where the food is. Okay? Then there's the tactile signal, where now the primates will help to groom each other. As they help in grooming each other, it ends up now strengthening their social bond. Okay. The fifth type of behavior is the mating and reproductive behavior. So mating and reproductive behavior, these are behaviors that ensure successful reproduction and offspring survival. So it's not just that there was reproduction. Reproduction has to be there, but what is important is if the product of the reproduction will survive, which is the offspring. Okay? So the examples of this mating and reproductive behavior is when you have male birds singing so that they can attract the females. So the singing will attract females to ensure that reproduction happens. Okay. Then you have the male bowerbirds coming up with very elaborate nests. And by doing that, they do so in a way to impress potential mates, so that they can move into that nest, so that they can, once they've moved in, then reproduction can happen. We've had frogs calling, and the signal for frogs will be indicating their readiness to reproduce. Okay. So when frogs will be calling, the others that once they hear that signal, they know that whoever is calling is ready for reproduction, so they will move. And in that case, it will increase chances of successful reproduction and possibly offspring survival. The aggression and territorial behavior. These are actions which animals display, helping to defend resources, mates, or territories from intruders. So resources and most things in the ecosystem that animals rely on are not in enough supply. Their supply is limited. So that means then the animals that rely on these resources, the animals that need these resources, must come up with ways of ensuring that they defend their territories from intrusion. So the behavior they portray to ensure that their territories are safe, the resources and mates are safe from intruders, is under the category of aggression and territorial behavior. Foraging behavior involves the strategies that animals use. Foraging is about finding, capturing, and consuming food efficiently. So foraging behavior, the strategies that the animals employ to find, to capture, and to consume food. Okay. So whichever strategy that the animals are using to locate food, to capture the food they've located, and to consume the food that they've captured in an efficient way, that is foraging behavior. It will be wasteful for the organisms to reproduce, produce offsprings, and not care about those offsprings. So that brings me to the 8th type of animal behavior, which is the parental care behavior. So this involves the actions taken by parents to protect and nurture their offsprings. Okay? So that will involve, for example, providing food and protecting these young ones. Okay? Because if you're only providing food and not protecting, then you are likely to end up with young ones that are very well fed, but they are consumed by predators. Okay. So under this, you find kangaroos, for example, carrying their young ones in the pouches. Okay. So what they are doing is they are caring for the young ones. They are portraying a behavior which ensures that the young ones are taken care of. This behavior is being portrayed by parents. So that's why it's a parental care behavior. The next is the play behavior. This is common in young animals. In animals, play will help in developing survival skills and enhancing social bonds. So in this case, that's why unapata kama paka, we say as playful as a kitten. Okay? As the cat, the kitten is playing, jumping all over, is developing its survival skills. But if the animals, the young animals are many, they play among themselves, then they are enhancing their social bonds. They are bonding together. Okay? They are bonding together. So the examples for this play behavior is when you have lion cubs play fighting. So they play as if they are fighting each other. And what they are doing, they are practicing the hunting techniques. You've seen this in dogs. Kiona umbwa wadogo. Okay. As they, so ukikuwa na mbili tatu nne, there are times you will think they are almost biting each other. Okay. So they are just enhancing their techniques for acquisition of prey if needed. Okay. The young primates, they will chase and wrestle so that they can build strength and agility. Young primates, so monkeys, baboons, chimpanzees, when they are still young, they will run around, wrestle each other down. What they are doing is they are not fighting, they are not hurting each other, but they are just trying to build their strength and their agility through that play behavior that they are portraying. Okay. We've seen that hata kwa ndama huko nyumbani, ikikuwa ndogo kidogo inaanza kimbia kwa boma. Play behavior. Okay? That's a play behavior. So we saw the types of animal behavior. There was one which was learned behavior. So let's get deeper into this type of behavior in animals. So as we said earlier, learned behavior is acquired through the experience, observation or interaction with the environment. It is not instinctive, which means this is something you get, you are not born with. So the learned behavior allows animals to adapt to changes and improve their survival chances. Okay. So we'll now move into the specific types of the learned behavior. So the first one that we had mentioned was the habituation. Habituation is the process by which an animal decreases or stops responding to a repeated harmless stimulus over time. So think of our njiwa, the pigeons, which are living in an urban area. Fikiria kama kuna ndege wale wanaishi town katikati, where there is a lot of noise and constant movement of humans. So for them to get to a level where now they realize these people, as much as they are moving up and down with all this noise, there is no harm. So these birds can now not move or respond or run away. So they don't respond to the movement. They don't respond to the noise. The process through which they went so that to get to a level to realize that these movements are not harmful. That is habituation. Okay. So they don't move. Upate umbwa zile ziko town, zimetulia tu, they cannot bark, haziwezi bwekea kila watu wanapita, because they are not threats. They came to realize that these people are not threats. That is habituation. So the animal decreases its response to a repeated harmless stimulus. But how does that happen over time? Which means when they first encountered that stimulus, even if it was harmless, they had not known that this stimulus is harmless. So they might have responded initially, but then with the time, they realized it is not, so they will stop responding. The second type of learned animal behavior is classical conditioning, what we call also the associative learning. So classical conditioning is learning that occurs when an animal associates two different stimuli leading to a conditioned response. So when a bell is rung repeatedly before feeding a dog, that dog will eventually begin to salivate when the bell begins to ring. Because huwa inasikia kengele ikigongwa inapewa chakula. Kengele ikigongwa inapewa chakula. But these are two independent events, two different events, two different stimuli. The first stimuli, kengele kugongwa. The second stimuli, kupewa chakula. But if it's happening that whenever the bell rings is followed with food, inafika mahali umbwa ikisikia tu kengele ikilia, inajua chakula inakuja. So it begins now to associate these two different stimuli, and how it associates them, it now has a conditioned response. So once the bell rings, the dog begins to salivate. Haijaona chakula, but inajua tu kwamba kengele venye imelia, chakula inakuja. The other thing is with the horses. Ikiona tu ile kitu inavalishwa kwa mgongo yake alafu mtu anakalia, the horse inaanza kufikiria kwamba wataiendesha. Okay. So ikiona tu mtu akitoka na hiyo kitu, inakuwa tayari kuendeshwa. Okay. The third type of learned behavior is the operant conditioning, which is the trial and error learning. So in this operant conditioning, learning is based on consequences, where behaviors are strengthened by rewards or weakened by punishment. Hii ni kama ile ilikuwa, I think most of you shule mkisoma mko mnapigwa na walimu. Okay? But ukifanya hesabu upite, unapewa zawadi. Ukianguka unapigwa. Okay? So then it means you have, for you to avoid punishment, you have to ensure that you don't do what makes you be punished. So the example given is when a rat, by pressing a lever, kikanyaga mahali, inapata chakula. Okay? So itaendelea kukanyaga ili iendelee kupata chakula. So. For people who train dogs, they can reward a dog for obeying commands. So then that means that dog will continue obeying the same command so that it can get rewarded. Okay. So you are trying. If it responds the way you want it to respond, you reward it. If it brings an error, you punish it. So because of the consequence of punishment, it will end up now trying to do what you want so that it cannot be punished. Okay? With the observational learning, this is now learning by watching and imitating the behavior of others. So you think of young chimpanzees. They learn to crack nuts using rocks by watching older chimpanzees doing it. So there's something that you do because you watched either your father, your mother, or your older brother, your older sister do. That is an observational learning. That is social learning. You learned it as you socialized through. Okay. Then the fifth is imprinting. This is a rapid and irreversible form of learning which occurs during a critical period in an animal's early life. So it is learning that is irreversible, and it is happening at very young age of that particular animal. Okay. For the ducklings, the young ones of a duck, they follow the first moving object they see after hatching. Okay. So be it kama ni anything that will move, hiyo ikitoka tu kwa mayai, kitu yote inatembea haraka, hiyo inaifuata. Imprinted. Okay. Irreversible form of learning. For the ducklings, does it will follow it. Okay. The newly hatched salmon, it has a way of imprinting on the chemical composition of their home river, so that salmon will still go back to that home river many years later in its life. Okay. So it had an attachment to the chemical composition of their home river venye ilikuwa imekuwa hatched at the very early stage of its life. Because of that imprinting on the chemical composition of their home river, later on in life, the salmon will still come back. Okay? Later on in life, it will still come back. The sixth and last form or type of learned behavior is the latent learning. So latent, not active. So learning that occurs without immediate reinforcement, but it is only demonstrated later when needed. So the example here is when there is a rat exploring a maze without a reward, but later it can navigate it efficiently when food is introduced. So the rat will initially learn how to move around that maze with no benefit, no reward at that particular stage when it's learning how to move around, how to explore that maze. But now later on when food is introduced, then the rat needs to explore that maze so that it can access food. So it has now to demonstrate its ability to move around so that it can get where the food is. It's the same thing when you have a cat in the house. The cat does not need to know the layout, where are the doors, where are the windows or something. But it will learn by itself. Okay? So when there is danger, that cat will know that there is another window somewhere. But when it was learning where that window was, it didn't need to learn. Okay. Haikuwa inahitaji kujua penye dirisha ingine iko ama penye mlango ingine iko. Lakini ile wakati itahitajika kutumia that knowledge of an escape route, then that cat will use it. So that is a form of learning which is latent. It learned without immediate benefit, but it will only be demonstrated when there is need later on. Okay? So we saw the applications. We saw why it's important. Okay? And as you can expect, ethology can be applied in wildlife conservation because it helps to understand how animals behave. Then once you know how an animal behaves, then you are in a position to know how to conserve it so that it can behave in a particular way. And if it doesn't behave the way it behaves, it will give you an idea that this animal is not exposed to the correct environment. Then now you can bring in, you can modify the conditions. Okay. So the application is just about how you use your knowledge of animal behavior. How do you apply it in the life of that animal? So in animal welfare, ukipiga, kuna hii kipindi walikuwa wanasema mtunze punda kutunze. Okay, so which means for you to benefit maximally from an animal, you must also ensure that that animal is well taken care of. How do you know that an animal is not well taken care of? How it behaves. Okay? How it behaves. So once you know that this animal is not behaving the way it behaves, and before you know how an animal behaves, you must have studied its behavior, which is now ethology. Okay. In veterinary and medical research, we saw that when they studied rats for anxiety, and it helped in treating human anxiety disorders. Pest control and agriculture, by understanding what attracts insects. If those insects are pests, then we can do away with what attracts them. By understanding what repels insects, then when we introduce what repels insects, which are pests, that can help us to reduce pests. And by reducing pests, we will have increased the agriculture produce. Okay. We saw the human-animal relationship and training. Kuna wale watu sahi wana train dogs. Kuna wale watu wanalima na ng'ombe. Okay. So zile ng'ombe zijawahi lima huwa zinawekwa na zingine zenye zimezoea kulima. So you are training the animals, the cattle that has never been used in plowing. Okay. So as you train them, you are establishing the human-animal relationship through training. Okay. Then the environmental impact assessment. When you study animal behavior, it helps us to evaluate the effects of human activities on ecosystem. Okay. When you know, for example, how animals react to noise, then the way particular animals react to noise, it will tell you that we have a lot of noise in this particular area, for example. So by seeing how these animals are behaving, it will help you to come up with ways in which now you can put in methods to ensure that the source of pollution is controlled. By determining how animal behavior has been changing with time, then you can understand how that history has impacted on the animals. So how we behave today is not how we behaved 10,000 years ago. Okay. So we can study the behavior of today and compare it with the behavior, for example, of chimpanzees, of baboons, on certain aspects. Then you can have an idea of how humans have evolved in that aspect of behavior. Robotics and artificial intelligence. So you have robots that are being created, and what robots do is that they just copy animals. So if it's a robot of a human being, will be copying what humans do. Okay. So the robots which are models of certain animals will be developed through artificial intelligence. Then through that, you are now able to create, to simulate how animals behave, but through machines. Okay. So observing, for example, how animals navigate obstacles has led to improvements in AI pathfinding and machine learning. So if you've created a robot which then has to navigate through obstacles on its way, you must do that by analyzing, by observing how animals will be able to change direction, to go around obstacles. Because robots are just creations that are imitating animals. Okay. So that has been ethology. We defined it. We saw the questions. We saw the types. We saw the types of the learned behavior. And eventually we've seen now how we can apply that ethology, the various ways in which ethology can be applied. So go through this video, and should you have a question, use my email. I know you have my phone numbers. Reach out and I'll be happy to respond. Otherwise, thank you very much and looking forward to our next engagement. Thank you.